Welcome back. I'm Jonathan Hill. I'm going to be doing something new today. I got asked by Father David, at my parish, to create some content for our parish's YouTube channel. And in talking about this project with Father Maximus, we decided to focus in on St. Dionysius, focus in on his corpus. So I'm going to be doing short little 10 to 15 minute segments on individual sections in the Dionysian Corpus. And we're going to start with Mystic Theology. It's only 5 paragraphs. It's relatively short. And then we'll jump into divine names. We'll go through all of that segment by segment, each video doing a segment, reading through it, discussing it, building up, what the Dionysian Corpus is, really going through it, if some might say, a deep dive. So I have clocked up here the first segment of Mystic Theology. But before we jump into the segment, I want to talk a little bit about how to read. So in doing some work with Father Justinian for the ground, I know before we were really doing that podcast, we did a short class, he and I, on Mystic Theology of St. Maximus. And he was very emphatic that you should read the whole text first before coming to the class. Okay, so we would set it up in segments. We would set up, so today we're going to read chapter 1, segment 1, chapter 1, segment 2 for the next class, etc., and that you should read the whole segment first, read the whole work first, and then come in and look at the kind of individual things. As your second reading, you go through it and you dissect it, and you write down your questions, you write down the things that you were curious about, and things that you wanted to note. So I'm not going to read through the whole Dionysian Corpus, but what we're going to do is we're going to first read through the segment, and then we'll go through it and we'll talk about it. So let's jump in here. St. Dionysius, he writes this. You can probably see, as you just scan it, he's writing to Timothy. Okay, so right away we realize that this is in the first stages of the church, of the development of the church. And this really does open up the gateway into how he thinks about theology, how he thinks about the church, how he thinks about God. Okay, so it's a really great starting point. Let's just go through. Section 1, Triad Supernal, both super God and super good, guardian of the theosophy of Christian men, direct us aright to the super unknown and super brilliant, and the highest summit of the mystic oracles, where the simple and absolute and changeless mysteries of theology lie hidden within the superluminous gloom of the silence, revealing hidden things, which in its deepest darkness shines above the most super brilliant, and in the altogether impalpable and invisible, fills to overflowing the eyeless minds with glories of surpassing beauty. This then be my prayer. But thou, O dear Timothy, by thy persistent commerce with the mystic visions, leave behind both sensible perceptions and intellectual efforts, and all objects of sense and intelligence, and all things not being, and be raised aloft unknowingly to the union, as far as attainable, with him who was above every essence and knowledge. For by the resistless, and absolute ecstasy in all purity, from thyself and all, thou wilt be carried on high to the superessential ray of the divine darkness, when thou hast cast away all and become free from all. This is section 1. Let's go back to the beginning. So now we have kind of an idea where we're going. We've kind of mapped it out. Triad Supernal, already talking about the Trinity, both super God and super good, guardian of the theosophy of Christian men. Let's pause here. This is probably a word that not a lot of people have heard of, theosophy. What is theosophy? Theosophy sounds like a combination of two words, theology and philosophy. And it's interesting that just this morning I had the discussion with a good friend of mine about the differences between theology and philosophy. Philosophy is the science or the art of understanding reality, understanding creation, how, what it is that we're participating with, we are interacting with, we are partaking of. Theology is the knowledge of God. Theology is the apprehension of God, the direct apprehension of God. So theosophy is the art, the science of the apprehension of God, the art of learning about God. Okay, so we cannot confuse these two. We can't confuse philosophy with theology and think that we're going to make in some kind of upside down world, we're going to make theology the handmaid of philosophy. We'll put the philosophy first. No, St. Dionysius already safeguards us, the guardian of the theosophy of Christian men. So this is the height, right? This is really where we're going. We want direct apprehension of God. That's theosophy. That is theology. Direct us aright to the super unknown and super brilliant, and the highest summit of the mystic oracles, where the simple and absolute and changeless mysteries of theology lie, hidden with the superluminous gloom of the silence. So here I'm going to highlight three things. This is a long passage, but I'm going to highlight three things here: super unknown, super brilliant, and silence. Here we have the three main parts of apophaticism. Okay, since we are talking about God and God's beyond being, St. Dionysius is going to obviously bring up apophaticism. So super unknown is the negation, right? We are negating. But then we jump into the second kind of apophaticism, super brilliant. We've talked about this before. Hyperabundance, something like the analogy that I've used before is when we stare at the sun. If we were to stare for too long, there would be so much light coming at our eyes that we would go blind, and it would turn to darkness. Okay. Excuse me, this section also is called On the Divine Gloom, on the Divine Darkness. So that's not a negation of light, that is that there is so much light coming from God that we become dark. It becomes dark to us, right? And silence. Silence is the third way of being apophatic. It is also known as laconicism, that is separated into two more subsets, where we do not talk about things we do not know, that is literally silence. And we do not talk too much about the things that we do know. Let's back up. So super unknown and super brilliant and highest summit of the mystic oracles were the simple and absolute and changeless mysteries of theology lie. Great. So I want to hone in on this word changeless. Again, St. Dionysius is already safeguarding any kind of development of doctrine, any kind of idea that we know more than the fathers of yesteryear, that we can somehow correct the saints of the past. The mystery of the God-man incarnate, of the God-man crucified, of the God-man resurrected is changeless. There is no change to that mystery. There is no change to that, to what is going on, and to what we are partaking of, and to what we are participating with. There may be a change in vocabulary, there may be a change in expression, but there is not a change to the actual dogma, to the actual doctrine, to the actual content. Okay, so already safeguarding against those things, right? Superluminous gloom of the silence, revealing hidden things, right? God has made darkness his hiding place, that's in the Psalter, which in its deepest darkness shines above the most super brilliant. I love this wordplay here. Deepest darkness shines. We don't think of darkness as shining, but again, St. Dionysius is packing in the apophatic, the hyperabundance language. The darkness is shining, right? So it's not a negation. It's not just a lack. It's a hyperabundance, right? Above the super brilliant. So above the most brilliant of light is where God is. And that shines down on the saints. And in the altogether impalpable and invisible fills the overflowing and eyeless minds. So here we're talking about the nous. The nous has the capacity for the direct apprehension of God, and it is eyeless. There is no eye. Okay, has no eye like a physical eye. Overflowing the nous with glories of surpassing beauty. This then be my prayer, that Timothy partake of what he is talking about. But thou, O dear Timothy, by thy persistent commerce with the mystic visions, leave behind both sensible perceptions and intellectual efforts. So let's back up and talk just a little bit about sensible objects and intelligible content. So if I take any kind of object, right, I have with myself here, I have a pencil. I can touch it, that's a sense. I can look at it, that's a sense. I can smell it. I could taste it if I ate it, for example, and I can hear the sound that it makes. Okay, so this is a sensible object. Okay, and those are my sense perceptions of this object. It also has intelligible content. That is, it's black, it's white, it has a gold thing here. It's also, you might not be able to see through the camera, but it is hexagonal. Okay, it has edges. It also has circumscription, and circumscription is something that I can't taste or smell. I cannot smell the circumscription of the pencil, but I can perceive the circumscription of the pencil intellectually as intelligible content. Okay, so all created being has both sensible content, that is the perceivable to the senses, and intelligible content that is perceivable only to the mind. Okay, and so what St. Dionysius is saying is that we must leave behind our sense perception and our mental perception. Okay, because as we're going to get into in a moment, God is beyond being. He's going to talk about this in two more ways: and all objects of sense and intelligence, as we just said, and all things not being and being. Great. Because again, being is sensible, is perceivable to the sense, and it is intelligible. To be is to be intelligible. And to be raised aloft unknowingly to the union, as far as attainable, with him who is above every essence and knowledge. Okay, so God is above being, God is beyond being, and he is beyond knowledge. Why? Because our knowledge, the content of our thought, is being. So when we have a thought of something, it is of some actual being, even if it is imaginary, even if we are putting together, for example, I can think of pink elephants. Well, pink exists, elephants exists, and so I am just simply imagining two already existent things together. So it is still of some being. But God is beyond being, he is beyond every essence, he is beyond all knowledge. And this is exactly why we have to get rid of our sense perceptions and our intellectual efforts. We have to give up those, because God's not an object. He's not an object, so he can't be smelled or sensed, and he cannot be directly apprehended by our rational knowledge. Only through the eyeless mind, only through the nous, can we apprehend God in this way. We also apprehend God. We do apprehend God sensibly when he becomes flesh, but then he's literally created being. We'll get into that much later. So let's move on. For by his resistless and absolute ecstasy in all purity, from thyself and all, that will be carried on high to the super-essential ray of the divine darkness. So super-essential ray, ray in the singular, super essential, right? The natural ray, the divine energy, right? The natural ray of the essence in the singular, right there. When thou hast cast away all and become free from all. So here again, he's reiterating that we have to give up our sense perception and we have to give up our intellectual efforts. We cannot rely on our knowledge, on our logic, on our syllogisms, on our systems, on presuppositions, on whatever kind of we have created in order to discuss theology, these things. And this is also reiterated by a number of our saints. I know Saint Maximus talks about this a lot in 400 Centuries on love, where he says, those who still have attachment to worldly things do not love God. Right? I mean, that's a striking statement. But we have to cast away our connection to created things, to created being, to sense perception, to intelligible perception. And we have to participate in the mysteries, in the changeless mysteries of theology that lie hidden in the superluminous gloom. We have to go. That's where we have to go. So this was only section 1 of Mystic Theology. There will be at least 4 more. It's a 5-paragraph segment. Some sections might take more than one video, but I'm going to go through Mystic Theology first, and then we'll jump into divine names, and that will take some time. I'll go through each video, we'll go through each segment very, very slowly, first reading it, then going through to dissect it. Again, this is also how we would read the fathers, you would not go to, just as you would not want to start thinking about what certain sentences meant without reading the whole context. You don't want to go into the fathers reading secondary literature first and then going to the fathers. You want to read the primary literature first. You want to read through the primary literature. You want to absorb its material. And you want to engage the primary material first. That's why it's primary. And then if you have questions or later, you move on to secondary material to see what others have thought about that, about the fathers, about their actual primary texts. So we're only going to be dealing with St. Dionysius for now. We may jump into some other texts. I know there's some good, there's Theophany by Pearl, there's Negating Negation by Nepper, there's some things by Sherrard and Schaeffer that I might allude to, or I might bring up a paragraph here or there, but we're going to be focusing almost entirely on the primary text on Dionysius himself. There are 3 translations of the Dionysian Corpus. This translation is the Parker. There is also the Rolt and the Rorem. We will probably be looking through all 3 of them as well. I didn't bring the other 2 up today. The video would be much longer if we were to go through all of them, but that might be something that I'll look into, kind of checking through the differences in the translations back to back. That actually seems kind of exciting and entertaining. So I hope this was edifying for you, and I hope that you keep listening in on the series on the Dionysian Corpus. Thank you, and God bless.